1 minute it's quiet with the birds singing. The next minute, the column of Sherman tanks coming around the corner going wide open. My buddy says, where those tanks come from? So I asked the tanker. He yells down there, the Third Army taking off. Been waiting for 3 weeks. Prepared somebody let the rabbit out of the hat. Man, what a rabbit. With pearl-handled revolvers.
When I think back to the breakthrough, I don't seem to be able to remember anything but the French people. People beside the road, kids we couldn't stop to give candy to, FFI boys bringing in the krauts from the fields, and farm workers waving as we went by. It was easier to look them in the face and smile and wave back at them when you hadn't had to smash their homes to pieces first. The morning we got into Rennes, boy, that really was liberation.
At Rennes, American armor planned to drive east and northeast, and thus surround and take the German corps divisions in the rear. The foe laid plans to stop the arrow dead by cutting its supply route at the point where it stretched narrowest along the coast. So a great force exploded toward Mortain, hoping at Avranches to achieve the siege and drag our hopes down to the smoking ground.
There's a lot of places I'd rather talk about than Mortain. That's where I got hit. We've been going great up to there. Some of the guys had even been singing, harmonizing. And then that first German artillery caught us. Pretty accurate, too. An hour later, I was short 18 men. Well, we holed in and we hit back with everything we had. They weren't just trying to stop us, see? They wanted to come right through. And then me. I get a belt in the face left side and I keeled. The last thing I remember is looking up and seeing those RAF Typhoons. When I heard them screaming up ahead, I thought, geez, I'm glad they're on our side.
I was sitting in front of the intelligence office doing a bit of sunbathing when headquarters came through saying the area northwest of Mortain was packed with German armor heading west. Well, that started it. For 6 hours, the wing kept it up absolutely non-stop. Take off, attack, land, refuel, rearm, and take off again. It was the same on every airfield in Normandy. The only briefing I gave the chaps was, well, you know where they are. And the only interrogation when they got back was, well, how many did you get?
3 days it lasted. Every kind of soldier was in there and every weapon. For me, it was just eating and smoking and loading at 105. No sleeping. Then things quieted down and the word came back. We stopped them cold. Everybody felt like celebrating, but that was a tough order out there. I tried drinking a whole bottle of cough medicine. It worked fine. I got stiffer than a plank.
The counterattack, which took us by surprise, still did not hinder our deceptive plans, for down from Caen the foe had drawn a force and left his north flank weakened. Now the stage was set. Toward Calais swept the Empire troops together with the Poles. The German heard behind his back American armor churn toward Argenton. Out-generaled and out-fought, he found himself within a closing trap.
I've covered them with a gun down to the clearing stations. Thousands of them, and all kinds. The tough ones with the smile froze stiff on their faces by shell fire. And the plain Joes that had too much and ready to tell you that. And their poker-faced officers that never lost the poker-faced look. The SS, the parachute troops, the old soldiers off the Russian front, I've seen them all. The Hitler youth babies looking like they walked out of Lincoln High. Expert killers. Smart Alec with their talk of rights under the Geneva Convention and asking, when do we go to America? And the other guy who crawled out of a hole with his hands up, all through and talking too much, and ready to swear he hated Hitler all the time. The kids that knew how a machine gun worked and nothing else. Grinning like they were still on top, so they could hardly hold that trigger finger still. And middle-aged guys wanting to tell you about the wife and kids, you'd let them. And they were through killing when I saw them, and through getting killed, too. Some of them thought they were lucky, and others didn't. And some didn't give a damn. I covered them down to the rear where it was somebody's job to find out what made them tick, but it wasn't my job to figure them out. I just kept them covered. And brother, I never gave them more than the Geneva Convention. And that was all.
American tanks ground on into the east toward Paris and the Upper Seine. Before them, the Germans helter-skelter fled away and saw retreat, or stood with hands upraised by roads all littered with their smoldering gear. And still the tanks ground on beyond the smoke into the unscarred country.
A good solid map, well delineated, is an absolute must for a modern mechanized army traveling at high speed. In our division, the issuing of maps was my job. When we broke out of the Cherbourg Peninsula, my department had the situation well in hand. Then, for us, everything went mad, stark, raving mad. One morning I woke up and the army had gone right off the map, absolutely right off the map. So we rushed through an order for 500,000 maps of the Orléans region. They arrived in due time. To our horror, the army progressed far beyond the Orléans region. It was off the map again. This was a period of acute crisis for me. I gave the highest priority to a fresh order of maps of the Paris area. We refused to be licked by this situation. The final blow came when it became evident that we were going to bypass Paris. That almost finished us. Eventually, we had to drop 10 tons of maps to them by parachute. It was a very humiliating experience. I'll be glad when I get back to the Library of Congress where maps have some permanent value.
While the Allies were fighting near Paris, we French soldiers of the Leclerc Division were fighting in the Normandy fields. And suddenly an order came. Go to Paris, it said, and take it. The Allies, after having equipped our division with tanks, guns, rifles, lorries and jeeps, that night decided to give us Paris too. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, the division starts rushing on the roads, and in the sky, on the right, on the left, everywhere, the American Air Force protects our trip. What a trip. 250 kilometers in one day. I think I'll tell it all the time to my grandchildren and bore them with it until I die.
At the beginning of August, we in Paris were seized by rumors. What could be confirmed was towards the middle of the month, the Germans started to leave the city. Yes, those were the same Germans who had signed 25-year leases on their apartments. Then, on the 14th, our police went on strike. The next day, the Gestapo left. That was the day, too, when a police car opened fire on a German detachment on the Place de la Concorde and began the battle for the city. After that, it seemed the French flag was hanging from every window. All the flags were made of curtains, all dresses, rags, everything, it didn't matter. 4 days later, we heard shouting coming from the Hôtel de Ville. We started running. Me, my husband, everyone in our house. As we ran, people were screaming. The French army had arrived. When we got to the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville, we saw it was true. I kissed my husband. because he was crying. Oh, it's funny, huh? We began to realize how unhappy we had been for 4 years and how lucky we were to be alive on this August evening.
The great pursuit was on. At last the Battle of France was ending, when all suddenly another D-Day stunned the shaken foe. 2 armies struck, American and French, along the broad-beached southern coast of France. Then north, the 2 new armies rolled like waves to join the forces moving on the right. Beyond the Seine, where from 100 sites the Germans launched their flying bombs and brought death and destruction on the English towns, our valiant armies went about the task long since assigned them. Toward the Reich frontiers, Americans advanced. Against the ports hugging the Channel, garrisoned in force by desperate foes, Canadians were sent. And in a thunderous sweep, the British armor surged toward awaiting Brussels.
People of Brussels laughed and cried and threw flowers in the tank and said, "Goodbye, Tommy," when they meant to say hello. Man, they were happy. I suppose they were no longer afraid. But I remember wondering then how the first German civilians would react to us.
I remember one day we were coming across a big flat field. Didn't look like nothing special. I hopped a barbed wire fence and a guy says to me, "Guess what?" So I says, "What?" So he says, "You're in Germany. There's a sign over there says." Then like a dope I thought, well, it won't be long now.
I want to quit over the fall of Paris and pin Bob on Brussels. And I had a fiver on it being over by October the 1st.
I remember the point system for getting out of the Army came out about this time. I began to think of that gray chalk-striped double-breasted suit in the mothball. I was in the 7th Army coming up from the south of France. One day a lieutenant said, "Take a ride with me. I got some prisoners for you to guard." "How many?" I says. "About 20,000, he said. A whole German division had surrendered.
We Canadians were advancing in the north. And one day we came across a thing I'd never seen before. I guess it's a flying bomb site, the officer says. Well, that really made me feel good.
The prisoner told us the newest Jerry gag. If an aircraft shows up white, it's American. If it shows up dark, it's British. And if it never shows up, it's the Luftwaffe.
Every time they sent me along the supper forward switchboard and I got my earphones on, I found out that the rear switchboard had leapfrogged 5 miles ahead.
I wrote to the old man in St. Louis. He owns a men's store. I told him he'd better cut prices on GI neckties and socks if he didn't want to be stuck with a lot of military apparel.
Someone asked the sergeant major what he thought the chances were for a spot of leave. "Don't you worry about leave, lads," he says. "We've got the Japs to finish yet." Regular soldier, of course. Keen.
It was a terrific feeling crossing the German border. We were damn sure nothing could stop us.
Then it happened. Just outside Metz, we ran out of gas. There just wasn't any to be had. I looked at my 30-ton Sherman sitting there, a useless hunk of iron. I wanted to bawl. I don't know how far we could have gone on, who knows. But it just stopped and sit there in the road. I knew then we were in for a rough time.
When we took Aachen, the rations were short and mostly K rations at that. But we ate. Then we started to run low on ammo. Well, that was serious. You can't kill a man with K rations. At least I never heard of such an instance.
From Antwerp to the Belfort Gap, our drives came to a stop. We could not then proceed until we had a port through which supplies could reach our armies. Crouched beside the quays, the German suicide garrisons held the port so sorely needed.
When the German port strategy became apparent, we had to move swiftly to counteract his plan. We captured Cherbourg in a mighty rush, but he hung on to other harbors, and when he couldn't do that, he destroyed them. That was the story at Brest, where American ground, air, and naval forces fought such a long, bitter battle. In Brittany, where we were joined by French resistance forces. At the Channel ports of Calais, won by the Canadians. Le Havre, captured by the British. Dieppe and Boulogne, Canadians. And Dunkirk, besieged by the Czechs. It takes a lot of freight per day, per man, to keep an army fighting in the field. The fellows I charged with getting it to the front had a tough nut to crack. We just didn't have enough working parts, that's all. Supplies suffered. Our offensive was slowed, and the German was gaining time to consolidate a new defense line.
When our supplies petered out, we'd just reached the Siegfried Line. That's as far as we got. We went through the first part easy, Dragon's Teeth and stuff like that. Then we hit the pillboxes, forts, obstacles, hidden positions. It was like going into one of those joints in Coney Island where you get lost. But instead of mirrors, they had guns. With supplies, maybe we could have cracked it then. Maybe not. I don't know.
Frontal assault upon the Siegfried Line was for the moment fatal. There, encased in trench and pillbox, lurked the German power, a hydra 100-headed, still unslaved, and all the cunning of 1,000 years of war had gone to mold its walls of steel. Yet every line must somewhere have an end. In southeast Holland, nothing lay between the British Army and the German plain except 2 rivers and a town. And so we made our plans, to send an airborne army down to seize Eindhoven and the bridges at Nijmegen and Arnhem, then to hold them for the force that would sweep up like thunder from the south. Thus, where no line existed, would the Rhine at last be crossed in force.
I was to jump last at Arnhem, so I sat right forward by the window. The blue skies and Dakotas with the fighters up topside like midges. One of the boys was reading a newspaper. He showed me a funny piece in it. I couldn't laugh. The coast of Holland came along before I was ready for it. Someone yelled, "Running up now." We got to action stations. I remember thinking, what a bloody bit of bad luck to be bumped off now when the war's nearly over.
The lineys drop at Arnhem and we come down and go to a place called Eindhoven, Holland. She goes good. We get right, dig in, set up a defense perimeter and wait for the British Army to come up. Then we join them and head out for Nijmegen.
The bridge at Nijmegen hardly had a mark on it. We crossed the river and started out for Arnhem, but we didn't get far. The Hun knew as well as we did that we'd damn well got to get through, and he put in everything he'd got. That was the worst I ever struck. Knowing our men were there waiting at Arnhem, and we couldn't get to them.
At Arnhem, we got ourselves well dug in, us and some of the posts. We were short of ammo and food. That was our main worry. I'll never forget those supply dropping missions. The way Jerry let loose at them, and the way they just came straight on into it. Towards the end, we knew the situation was bad. We knew we were hemmed in. We knew it was possible we wouldn't get out. More than anything, I remember the way everyone behaved. Men you knew as the toughest fighters became gentle, kind and considerate to each other. I knew a lot more about men after Arnhem.
The guns died out in Arnhem. Then we knew the greatest gallantry was not enough to cross the final bridge. And now no choice remained to us. Direct assault against the Siegfried Line would be the only way to carve our corridors into the Reich. But first a port was needed for supplies. Antwerp we had, but thundering German guns controlled the 30 cold miles of the Scheldt from Antwerp to the sea. The docks were still, the winches silent, all the ports lay dead, a useless city severed from the sea. It would stay dead until we cut away through the grey Scheldt. So the battle formed to free the estuary for our ships.
I covered that battle for the Associated Press. I only wish I could have written the story with the greatness of the men who fought it. It was vicious and fearsome fighting all the way. The Canadians and the Poles clearing the south bank of the river, the Royal Navy and Marines and Norwegians charging knee-deep in blood and water into the mouths of the 9-inch shore guns at West Capelle. It was the kind of fighting that makes legends. And the minesweeping of the Scheldt afterwards. It was the greatest operation of its kind in history. The cost of that first ship into Antwerp Harbor was the lives of thousands of our bravest men. I reported it as well as I could, but their memory deserves more than words.
I was hauling on the first convoy out of Antwerp. When I got to the front, I saw more empty supply dumps than I liked to see. The boys wanted to know where the stuff was. You can't fight without stuff. Anybody knows that. I made lots of trips. I don't know how many. Driving all day, all night, singing so as to keep awake. Songs like, Milkman, Keep Those Bottles Quiet.
My job was to see to it that they had a new toothbrush and a cot, maybe a book to read when they came over from the east bank to the west bank of the Moselle for a little rest. We brought them over one company at a time because that was all the regiment could spare from the line at any one time. Somebody had tapped them on the shoulder and said, "All right, boy, you're going back across the river for 24 hours rest." And here they were, where they could rest. They just couldn't believe it. Here they were for just 24 hours without war. Everything was down to essentials, counted out like dollar bills through a teller's window. One night's sleep, one day's hot meals, one clean change of underwear, one clean pair of pants, one shave, one hot shower, one movie. I used to wonder what was the best of that day. Was it the chance for them to write home, a hot shower, or that long-legged girl on the screen? Whatever it was, all of it was over by morning. They were going back with their one clean suit of underwear, the hot shower, the clean shave, and the good night's sleep. Back across the Moselle to their holes in the ground and the shells.
By that time, we knew we were going to see a winter campaign. There was no way out of it. The Germans were dug in and they were tough. And it was plain that until we got a lot stronger, we weren't going anyplace.
The squadron was operating whenever it could. There wasn't a lot of flying. We were iced up and fed up.
Suppose you're having a swell time in Paris, my cousin wrote me, with all that perfume and silk stockings and that champagne.
They called our end of the line south. We were in the Vosges Mountains with the American 7th Army. But it was very little warmth in this south. I recalled with pleasure the Mediterranean where we had landed in August. But memories do not keep one warm.
Before I joined the army, I'd have thought it was certain death to dig a hole in my back garden and live in it for the winter, but that's what we did. The sergeant said, "Well, squirrels do it every year." Yes, I thought, but they don't man machine guns as well.
There was no heating in our Brussels office. I put on so much under my uniform, they called me the bundle from Britain.
I never smoked before, but pretty soon I found myself smoking as high as a pack a day. I worried about that old law of percentages. My company was melting away. You'd look up one day and be fighting alongside a stranger. It was a lonesome feeling.
Our hunk of the line was the Ardennes. Pretty quiet. A lot of outfits had gone up north. They started a million latrinagrams about the where and when of our offensive. Then one day I'm standing guard and these shells start. I thought for a minute this was it. Till I realized these shells weren't outgoings, brother. They were incomings. Next thing I knew, German tanks. It was an offensive, all right, but it was going the wrong way.
The offensive we were mounting to the north was suddenly forestalled and set aside, as through the rugged, thinly held Ardennes, von Rundstedt struck. He cut a fiery path through the American lines and sent his tanks desperately driving toward the River Meuse. A night of fog and pale December frost saw the beginning. None foresaw the end. He aimed for Antwerp's harbor through Liège, and all our plans held fire while we bent our strength to curb the Germans in the Bulge.
was a replacement in England playing shove halfpenny in a pub. The next day they shoved me in an aeroplane, and that night I was fighting Germans and being kicked around. I don't know about the other outfits, but mine was being cut to ribbons. They were dropping all around me. The thing that still sticks in my head is the medics. The only weapon they had was a needle, but they were around right where it was the hottest. You'd hear that yell, medic, medic, and they'd always be there.
Our whole division got a presidential citation for what happened up at Bastogne. Even me, just a cook. I'll never forget that old lieutenant running into the field kitchen and hollering at me if I had any idea how to operate a bazooka. I said no, and he said, well, you're going to learn now, son. I did, and I'll be doggone if in the first shot out the barrel I didn't get me a Jerry tank. Got interviewed later by Stars and Stripes. They said it was a crackerjack story. I tell it at the drop of a hat.
We'd been up north where things were a bit static, so we were quite glad to be moved down to the top side of this battle. Coming down through Belgium, we noticed how scared some of the civilians looked. Natural, I suppose. We were held in reserve for a week, and then they sent us into action.
On account of the fog, we couldn't get any air coordination. You sure miss it bad when you've gotten used to it all the way since D-Day. And then on December 24th, like a Christmas present, that sun come up, and after a while we was giving him the old 1-2 again.
Stopped them dead, finally. It cost us plenty of men, but we stopped them. And we started moving ahead again. The rest of us.
Reeled back on a recoiling spring. His great attempt was over, and his armies that had devoured such a wealth of blood sagged sodden towards the Rhine. At Yalta then, while dire explosions shook the German fronts, the three great architects of freedom met to fix the final blow and plot the peace. And even as they met, we moved to act upon our strategy. We wished the foe to stand and fight upon the western bank of the Grey Rhine, for there we could destroy him, outside his fortress, open, unprotected by any bridgeless river. Down we cast the gauntlet, challenging him, stand and fight.
We were attacking the north of the Canadians, round about the Reichswald forest and Dutch frontier area. It was wet and filthy. They nicknamed our army commander Admiral Kriller. Well, anyway, the enemy put up some very stiff opposition. But actually, this was just what we'd hoped for. It showed that Jerry's emotions about fighting for every foot of his beloved fatherland were getting the better of his sense of strategy. And every German killed on our side of the Rhine was to make it easier for us on the further bank. And a lot of the Boche were killed, I can tell you. Reichswald was the bloodiest show I've seen in this war.
It was one hell of a push. The captain told me 8 divisions. He usually knows. He follows things like that. I was with the outfit that took Mönchengladbach, I think you say it. There weren't many civilians in the streets, and even the ones that were there we weren't supposed to talk to unless we had to. There was a $65 rack for fraternization. I wonder how they happened to figure out that number. I mean, why 65?
We could see the Cologne Cathedral a long time before we got there. That tower was our objective. It was on the Rhine River. We went fast, and by the time we got into town, there wasn't too much fight left in it. Cologne was mangled, all right, but there were still a few buildings standing. I was sorry. I thought of those French cities, flattened. Anyway, we got our objective. Now we had to cross that river.
I thought they must be very short of men when they put us sailors into battle dress, lugged the assault boats on the trucks and sent us across Belgium by road. We talk about silent service. I'd never been sick at sea, but I was sick as a dog on the road. When we reached our destination, I was feeling lousy, longing for a breath of sea air. I found the whole bloody landscape under a stinking smoke screen. Like London it was. The next day we got up to the Rhine. It was good to get a glimpse of the water again.
Our Air Force is giving the old lumps on the east bank of the Rhine, but I was still nervous. The Germans had blown the bridges, and we knew the crossing would be amphib. When I'm nervous, I get off my feet. For 2 days before that crossing, I couldn't eat nothing but a couple of Milky Way bars. It was going to be D-Day all over again. Dangerous.
A miracle. There it was sitting there, big and black. I'm no architect, but to me that Remagen Bridge was the most beautiful bridge in the world. In the Army, when things go as per plan, that's wonderful. But when they go better than planned, then you figure the chaplain's working overtime. It was a break getting that bridge, and we cashed in on it. And the first guys over the river were over in style. The watch on the Rhine was finished, washed up. For to coin a phrase, kaput.
Across okay and everything was going fine. But suddenly I gets detailed to guard some German prisoners. I'll never forget their faces when them airborne blokes started to come over. They just stood there looking up at them, and then after about half an hour of it, one of them looks at me, looks up at the sky and says, propaganda.
Pocket was the first big objective across the Rhine. We and the heavies sealed it off, then the ground forces wrapped it up. After that, they exploded in all directions. Cut the Jerry armies up in pockets, then take them one by one. That was the program. The Third Reich was being carved up like a Christmas turkey.
Chasing the Boche was getting a little bit monotonous. We hardly ever saw him, only burning houses, a few shells, and occasional sniper's rifle shot. It was a silly kind of defiance, I thought. And then one day the routine was broken. We came across a prisoner of war camp, other ranks, Yanks mostly. And they went mad when they saw us, screeched red Indian war cries, pummeled one another, and asked what the news was. I seemed ashamed to tell them when they were so happy. Well, there was nothing for it. I told them. President Roosevelt died yesterday afternoon, I said. You should have heard him quieting down. For once in this campaign, they all felt as though they'd suffered a major defeat. I'd have liked to have stayed there, talking to them, trying to cheer them up, but we had no time to lose. Jerry only had a few hundred square miles of earth left to scorch. Our job was either to hurry him up or scorch it for him.
We were in the home stretch, cutting deeper all the time, when we ran into these displaced persons, slave workers. They were sick and hungry from all over Europe. The roads were jammed with them, but they kept out of the way and didn't give us any trouble. Like a fella said, there's a lot more than town's gonna have to be reconstructed.
I wondered what was up when all RAMC personnel in our lot down to stretcher bearers were urgently called for. I soon found out we'd taken the Belsen concentration camp. Well, I'm not squeamish. I've seen amputations, operations, deaths long before I went in the army in '41. I was a warden. I lost count of all the arms and legs I pulled out of the wreckage down in Croydon and got quite used to it. But this was different, very different. I don't know any words big enough to make you understand what we all felt. All I can say, and I'm proud of this, is that I had to fall out and be quickly sick in the courtyard. As I say, I'm not squeamish, but, well, I'm human, and thank God for it.
The government sent a few of us congressmen over to see those camps, and if there's anybody left who wonders if this war was worth fighting, well, I wish they could have been along. There it was, right in front of us, fascism and what it's bound to lead to wherever it crops up. I talked to some of the prisoners, the ones that had the strength to talk. Their offenses were the usual Nazi crimes, you know, wrong religion, or wrong race, belonging to a union, or the wrong political party. In Germany, it led to over 400 camps, like the ones I saw. It was the worst thing I ever saw in my life, and I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
When an army gets to moving in a hurry, that's where air transport comes in. We'd been flying in the stuff along with the British Transport Command since D-Day. And towards the end, they seemed to be moving faster on the ground than we were in the air.
As pocket after pocket of the foe fell, our hopes rose higher than the soaring flames that marked the broken towns of Germany. In Italy, 1 million prisoners came in, as with a single sudden blow, the German power was smashed. Then our tanks drove through the southern mountains, where the foe had hoped to make his furious final stand. The Russians took Berlin and cut the heart from Hitler's empire. And he himself, who planned to rule the earth from pole to pole, vanished like smoke among the falling walls. Upon the green banks of the River Elbe, we waited for the east and west to meet.
We linked up with the Ruskies at the Elbe River. I hung around for a couple of days with a Tommy gunner named Kanin. He didn't know any English, so I taught him to say my aching back, and he taught me Tovarish. That means comrade. We drank toast to Lend-Lease and had a million laughs. Then old Kanikov found an interpreter and gives a toast to the great American soldier. That stopped me. We did all right, but I don't like to think where we'd have been without them.
We were going towards the Danish frontier. Bremen fell, then Hamburg. The rot was setting in. 1.5 million surrendered in the north. The fighting was nearly over, and our job was beginning. We'd been training a long time for the administration of Germany, and we were prepared for plenty of trouble. Sabotage, passive resistance, or perhaps something more violent. You know, werewolves in sheep's clothing. But as it turned out, most of them were docile and did what they were told. They seemed healthy, well-fed. Their disease was in their minds. A German woman, looking at what was left of her town, said to me, "If only you'd given up in 1940, none of this need have happened."
1 minute after midnight, May the 9th, 1945. The guns stopped. D plus 337.
Now it starts. All the arguments about who won the war. Well, here's what I say. That no country on earth could have won it alone. So what does that mean? That anybody who wants to take a bow by himself is not only boasting, but nuts.
I spent 4 years in the infantry, and I saw my share. And during that time, I only met 3 men that liked to fight, and they were a little cracked. But it had to be done. Now that it's over, I feel good, except for one thing. All this talk about World War III. These big pessimists that talk so easy about another war just didn't see this one, or enough of it.
We watched them bringing in some high-out prisoners, quite ready to be friendly, some of them. I was thinking of fellas I'd known who'd bought it. Crashed, shot down, missing. Right through from the Battle of Britain. I remembered their faces, or some joke they'd played, or maybe just the way they laughed or something. There seemed to be such a lot of them I remembered. To the victor belongs the spoils. That's what they say. Well, what are the spoils? Only this. A chance to build a free world, better than before. Maybe the last chance. Remember that.
The heaving shadow lifts, the smoke dies down, and Europe, freed at last, begins to breathe and stir among the ruins. Now our minds, our hearts, emotions, all facilities must turn to where Japan engulfs the East. The power of our arms must be deployed 10,000 miles across a wounded world to what can be the last of all the wars if we retain the brotherhood of hope forged in the flames with men of many lands. In that titanic struggle still unwon, in the bright peace which then will bless the earth, may we keep in our hearts this ancient prayer. O Lord God, when thou givest to thy servants to endeavor any great matter, grant to us also to know that it is not the beginning, but the continuing of the same until it be thoroughly finished, which yieldeth the true glory.